Welcome everybody to the 43rd episode of Comic DNA, on which we will be discussing Alias by Brian Michael Bendis and Michael Gaydos, first published by Marvel Comics in 2001. I am Aaron Walther, and joining me today are three very special guests. First, we have a regular artistic collaborator of mine. You guys probably, if you read any of my work, you probably know him. I have Mr. Chris McJunkin. Chris, thanks for being back on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And second, we have, returning just from our previous episode about Daredevil Born Again, we have writer extraordinaire Jordan Alsaqa.
Thanks.
Yes,
you said it right.
Remember? Okay, I was like, oh my gosh, I forgot how to pronounce his name. And third, we have, appearing for the first time on this show, is a local St. Louis guy that I've met at a few comic conventions. Editor of the St. Louis anthology comic series Ink and Drink, we have Mr. Steve Higgins. Steve, thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
Excellent. So, I'm going to ask you guys straight up before we start talking about the book. I just want to talk about how things are going with you guys. Jordan, we just in the last episode we were talking about your Kickstarter that you had going on. That's over now. How did that go?
It went well. It was a very nerve-wracking finish. I think you've had a Kickstarter, so I'm sure you know what that's like.
Oh yes.
At the very end, even we managed a good bit above our goal. But even at the end, I had this paranoid sense of 7 or 8 people just suddenly pulling out all their huge level goals and it all collapsing like a house of cards.
Right.
Which fortunately didn't happen. So we had that happen. The funds cleared, and now it's a matter of art getting finished, which means I kind of am sitting waiting.
Been there too, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. Congratulations on that. I'm looking forward to the book.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, Chris, I know you and we're still working on stuff together. I know you've done a lot of conventions this year.
Yeah, I think 18 this past year. So.
Jeez. Yeah. That is a lot,
and
man.
I totaled my car at my next to last convention I did back the beginning of last month, which was fun.
I saw those pictures on Facebook,
yeah,
man. That's a bummer.
Good times.
Yeah, Chris is a working man.
Yeah.
But yeah, hopefully he and I will have some new stuff to show you guys pretty soon. I got to get back on the New Haven Comics website and start putting some new stuff up there. We haven't done a whole lot this year, but there's some exciting stuff coming for next year.
Oh yeah.
So Steve, I know you are the editor of Ink and Drink. I've appeared in one of the Ink and Drink books. I know that you do some comics for Ink and Drink. Do you do anything else? What else are you working on?
I have done some single issue mini comics over the years, but I actually haven't done one on my own like that since 2011. I've been pretty much pouring all of my efforts into Ink and Drink. We do a book every 6 months.
Yeah,
and so
you guys have a crazy schedule. I'm so impressed that you were able to stick to that.
Yeah, our 12th book is coming out in April. Going to debut at Wizard World St. Louis, called Spirits of St. Louis 2. Hair of the Dog. Our very first book that we did was Spirits of St. Louis. It was a horror book, and we're coming back around to that now finally.
Oh, that's good. It's gonna be pretty exciting.
Yeah, definitely pumped for it.
So, I know if you guys have any listeners out there who've listened to any episode that Chris has been on, I know Chris is a pretty big fan of Brian Michael Bendis. Chris is the original fan. Goes way back to when Bendis was before he was even maybe could be considered an indie darling, when he was just an indie guy.
Yeah, it was back when he was self-publishing Jinx through, was it Caliber?
I do not remember.
Yeah, but we're talking about 95.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, back in the day. So.
Yeah. So yeah. Chris, I certainly know exactly how you feel about Alias, I'm sure.
Right, yeah.
Jordan, I can't remember. We talked a little bit about Daredevil and how Bendis's run came after Frank Miller, but I don't know. Have you read a lot of Brian Michael Bendis? Are you a big fan of his?
I'm a big fan. I've read a lot of his work. Ultimate Spider-Man, Daredevil, Alias, just about a year ago when the show was kind of announced in the first place, is when I read that. But a lot of his Avengers stuff, I'm a big fan. I really prefer his work on solo characters as opposed to big teams. So I think that works with Alias.
Me too. So.
That's something we're going to talk about, for sure. Steve, I actually part of the reason I invited you to be on this episode, I saw you post on Facebook that when the Alias show, the Jessica Jones show, I'm sorry, I should say, I don't want to confuse anybody with the other TV show called Alias. The Jessica Jones show came out. I remember you making a post, something about how Alias is one of your favorite comics. Am I remembering that correctly?
Yes, it definitely is. I was a regular reader when it was coming out in single issues. It had been a Bendis fan for years, was pre-Powers, but I'm trying to remember exactly when I got turned on to him. I'm not exactly sure, but around Powers, I guess. And then followed to Alias, and I just absolutely loved Alias. I think it's the best thing that he's ever done, and I really loved the show. I thought the show really did the book justice. So
that's good. Yeah, we'll talk about the show in a little bit. Before we start talking about the book, I just want to give like kind of a history, like of the time setting of when this book came out, because we're kind of talking about like Chris, you're talking about starting to read Bendis in like 95 or in the 90s, and Steve, you're talking about when Powers came out, like the early 2000s, and Jordan, you basically just started reading all this like within the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, I got into comics mainly probably around the mid 2000s, so I was late to the game on Bendis. Brian K. Vaughan's Runaways is the book that brought me in. So from there, I kind of explored everything. Bendis was a big part of that with Ultimate Spider-Man, but this was out of print for a while, so it was kind of hard to read it if I had even wanted to.
Yeah. So, Alias marked the debut of Marvel's Max line of comics, which were explicitly advertised as R-rated comics. And this kind of came at a time when Marvel was officially ditching it had been ignored for a while now, but they were officially ditching the Comics Code Authority. And Marvel was kind of in the middle of a creative boom, I would say. By 2001, they were working hard at rebounding from the collapse of the 90s and their bankruptcy, and they were really trying to rebrand themselves and get back, get the industry back somewhat to what it was. And they were trying a lot of new things. They had the Ultimate Universe, which had started the previous year, I think, in 2000, maybe 99. And they had the Marvel Knights line of books. That's where like the new Daredevil series really kind of came into its own. Started out of that. And so the Max line was just kind of following suit with Marvel's attempt to publish new things and kind of make comics that didn't look like the cheesy 90s comics. And so this was the time when all the hot indie writers that were working at Image or Vertigo started getting work at Marvel, and they would basically eventually shape it to what it is today, really. But a lot of what we see of Marvel Comics today started in the 2000s with this. There was like a significant turn. I think if you were reading comics at the time, like you could notice the significant change. And Alias is kind of a big book. I think it's kind of one of the big indicators because it's an R-rated comic. The first. I guess I should say anybody who's listening to this, we are going to be talking about an R-rated comic, so you might hear some strong language in this podcast. Because like the first line of dialogue is just a very loud fuck, and that's a big deal to see in a Marvel comic because I think that's the first time Marvel Comics ever published, an uncensored fuck. So it is an important comic, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Steve, you had said that Alias is one of your favorite comics.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I take it back. You had said that Alias is probably Bendis' best comic.
Yes.
I pretty much agree with that. I run hot and cold on Bendis, but I really liked what he was doing at this time period.
Yeah, as I was rereading it just recently, I didn't really recall how intertwined it was with what Bendis was writing in Daredevil at the time, but it's really kind of difficult to read Alias without knowing what was going on in Daredevil, and for him to be doing so great writing Daredevil and then writing this book at the same time, and I feel like he was doing Powers also and was really at the height of his game creatively with Powers too. It really is just amazing. It was kind of his big boom period as a creator, I think.
Yeah, I definitely think he was on fire. And I also think that a book like Alias and a book like Daredevil works to his strengths of what he is as a writer. I had a friend one time say, I have a friend who's very dismissive of Brian Michael Bendis, and he said something to the extent of Brian Michael Bendis gave the comic book industry unique and realistic dialogue at a time when it needed it the most. And I would say that that's true. This definitely is like a book that, like a Marvel you don't hear Marvel comic characters talk like this, or you didn't at the time.
Right, and they kind of poke fun of that actually in the Secret Origin of Jessica Jones, that two-parter, when Thor rescues her from the water, like Thor gets onto her a little bit about how dirty her language is, and that's just hilarious. I think that it's kind of a knowing wink to the audience that yes, Marvel comics aren't supposed to sound like this.
Right. Yeah, definitely. I think that I don't know. I'm going to stop talking about everything that I think. Chris, as somebody who's read a lot of Bendis, how would you stack Alias up against his other books?
To talk more about what y'all were just talking about.
Sure.
With not just in the, I guess in regards to the just the language, but like I remember reading the book at the time and being really impressed by how it was kind of taking more of like a real world view of this character, kind of on the outside looking in, like whenever Captain America and the Avengers are kind of brought into the first story arc when she's investigating the missing persons case, and you're kind of you're basically seeing it from more of a real world, type of perspective, and especially at that time, kind of coming out of the 90s when everything was kind of hyper action, what have you, much more the 90s feel of those superhero comics and what have you. It was the first time that I recalled, really, especially within the Marvel universe of seeing that type of perspective, and that's what really stood out to me the most. Regarding this Bendis' other stuff, what was he? He was doing Ultimate Spider-Man about that time, Daredevil, and those I thought were really those books and this one, Powers, kind of those, like y'all were saying before, kind of the standalone stuff, rather than like the team books. Always felt, like his stronger writing. The character-driven stuff, the more street-level characters. I never got into the cosmic stuff as much. But I know we talked about this, I think, when we were talking about Powers in a previous podcast. And I don't think you had read it at the time, but Bendis is run on Sam and Twitch from McFarlane, the Spawn.
Right. I still haven't read that.
And that's honestly kind of a good precursor to this as well.
Okay.
I still really, really recommend going back and checking that out if you hadn't had the chance. That was again one of it's a street level type crime book. Really plays to his strengths in that area. And they also incorporated his previous character, the bounty hunter Jinx, which is kind of similar to Jessica Jones in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, just going towards that, I don't know, I might argue Powers as like probably my favorite, but I think what makes Alias stand out from any of his other Marvel work is just the fact that, like kind of what Chris was saying, it feels like him more than any other book he's done, because he created the character and really got to do whatever he wanted with the book in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I was actually just going to bring that up, with the possible exception of Daredevil, because I think that he did really, really get like Daredevil's character and
Yeah.
the voice of the book. I do think that part of the reason I think Alias is certainly his best Marvel work, again, I say with the possible exception of Daredevil, is because of the fact that it's an original character. And he's got, like, it just exists in the fringes of continuity. Like, he's not having to deal with, like, a lot of, like, the big history. It all just kind of, it's all window dressing. It's still really just about him just kind of in his own corner of the Marvel Universe, just doing his own thing with new characters, with a new character, I should say. And I think that works really well for him. Now, what do you guys think if he had gotten to use Jessica Drew as the main character? Like,
Yeah, but wasn't that originally his intent, that they couldn't get a hold of the character? Or
it was something to that effect. I don't remember if Marvel didn't want him to use the character, or if he just eventually, like, the idea just changed. But yeah, originally it was going to be Jessica Drew, and instead became an original character.
Yeah, honestly, I was so unfamiliar with Jessica Drew at that point. I don't really know how that would have affected the story in a.
I think, I don't know. I can see, I kind of agree with that. Even until recently with his work with her in the Avengers and in her recent ongoing, Jessica Drew was kind of a question mark that he probably could have gotten away with. Maybe not as much freedom, like, with the backstory, but
Right.
even then, she's got the similar backstory with, like, the random kind of experiment that led to powers and
Right.
stuff like that. So it probably would have worked out pretty well. But I do think it's better that there's another character as opposed to just updating an old one. I think it let him have the more freedom.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I think, if you read the first arc, or even the second arc, Jessica Drew would fit in that slot very well. But I think after that, he took Jessica Jones in her own direction so much that the book wouldn't have been the same.
Yeah. I also think that ultimately Jessica Jones as a character is a better contribution to the Marvel Universe than just trying to update, Spider-Woman.
Yeah.
It would have. I actually think it maybe would have felt a little dated, because if it was Spider-Woman, if it was just like, this is the time that Spider-Woman ditched her costume and wore a leather jacket, that would just be that period in her history, and eventually she'd go back to wearing the costume.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's another thing is just that it might have been jarring, especially if going with that, the idea that by now she probably would be back in the costume and be a hero again, is that any of the other characters you see in this book, it's kind of jarring to see the Max interpretation of them.
Yeah.
And so it might be weird reading hard-edged Jessica Drew if she was now just the, cape and spandex type again.
Right, yeah. I do think also, I think that historically, if you look at the stuff that Bendis has done since this, like a large criticism I have of Bendis as a writer is he oftentimes will take like a character that's not been used a whole lot, or just kind of like a D-list, C-list character, and he'll try to like reinvigorate them, and I am almost never pleased with it. Like, I think he like will always just kind of, all the characters just kind of all have his same voice, and they don't mesh up with like what they originally were. And I think that would have been the case with if he used Jessica Drew in Alias. Now, granted, I don't care about Jessica Drew, so I'd still like the book just fine. But I do think that that's kind of that would be a sticking point for a lot of people. Like, people that are Spider-Woman fans. I assume they're out there somewhere.
She had a long-running ongoing, so yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she did. Yeah.
I will say one character he did that well with was actually Luke Cage, because Luke Cage really wasn't being used in any capacity at the point that.
You know what? That's fair. I think he actually did breathe new life into Luke Cage.
No, I could possibly be completely misremembering that, because that was like 15 years ago, but yeah,
no,
in my memory, I don't think they were really using Luke Cage.
Luke Cage really wasn't doing anything around this time. I think that's partially why he got to be in the book.
Right.
And I mean, it wasn't until until Bendis started doing New Avengers that he put Luke Cage on the Avengers, and that's when Luke Cage started becoming kind of more of a viable property, I guess you could say. One thing I was going to say was I really liked the first two. I read it in trade, so I really liked the first two trade paperbacks. I really liked the stories that are just sort of take a job, try to solve the case. Here's the mystery. I did kind of start to feel like the series was losing me a little bit when they started really getting into like Jessica Jones's past and her own continuity. I don't know. Maybe I'm just. I was less interested in how they were trying to tie her continuity into the Marvel Universe continuity, but I can see like the purpose of doing that, of like firmly planting her in the Marvel Universe.
To me, what I think of that is, because really, yeah, it's for about 20 issues, it's the book that it is at the beginning, and then I think it was just probably a matter of he found out it was getting canceled, and there had to be a certain level of there weren't questions answered as to why she was who she was, so he probably had a longer game planned or in his mind. And then when your book's getting canceled, you do what you can to get out everything that you want, so that hopefully you can have someone else take up the character. Fortunately, he's had a long career at Marvel where he's been able to keep writing her, but at the time, he was probably like, this might be it for her. I need to give her backstory.
Yeah.
And I think all of that also to a degree, because they were canceling Alias, but then they were relaunching it as Pulse, and that was being presented as a more mainstream book. I think, like, especially with having Mark Bagley come in, kind of doing the flashback stuff, I think they were trying to get some of the other, the Avengers, some of the other characters as kind of, intertwined into the story more for whenever they did that Salt reboot or whatever. So I think that might have been part of it. I'm really not sure.
Well, I don't know. Have you guys read many other comics that were in Marvel's Max line?
No, not really.
Because I think Marvel's Max line has been kind of I don't think it was like that huge of a success. Pretty much, Garth Ennis' Punisher. Right. Yeah, I was about to say, it pretty much existed just for Garth Ennis to write the Punisher, I think.
They did a few other miniseries. We were talking about Luke Cage. There was a Luke Cage miniseries that Brian Azzarello wrote that was really, really good. It's just a 4-issue miniseries, and I'm pretty sure that the trade of it went out of print a long, long time ago. But and they did along with the Garth Ennis regular series, they did a miniseries called Born, which was the Punisher in Vietnam, Frank Castle in Vietnam, and that was pretty good too. But beyond that, I couldn't think of anything else that was from Max.
Well, I think there was a period where Punisher Max was like the only Max book being published for a few years. Because like you said, Steve, mostly it was just like little miniseries here and there. And I think they are still publishing stuff.
Yeah, I know there was a Deadpool Max series recently. I don't know if that's still going, but that's fairly recent.
That was probably a few years ago, because I was buying that. But I mean, anyway, I can see the desire to try to move the character Jessica Jones into like a more mainstream book and continuity, especially with upping Luke Cage and the New Avengers at the time. There was just a lot of shifts going on with the characters, and they're trying to make them, I think, more accessible to a wider audience.
Now, I will say the Pulse series was not nearly as good as Alias was. I don't remember how many issues that ran. But it was kind of like the segue, I think, between Alias, then there was Pulse, and then the New Avengers started. That she was kind of an additional character in that, like a supporting character.
Yeah, I did not.
Avengers.
I didn't read that book. That was because they were doing one of their crossovers at the time, weren't they?
Oh gosh, no, I'm really having to dig back. I haven't read that stuff in a long time, but basically the first few years of his run on New Avengers kind of led into the whole Skrull secret invasion or whatever. which was actually my exit from all of the all the Avengers stuff. Once that was done, I was like, all right, that sucked. I'm out.
I can, in fact, I just did kind of the mega read through from the beginning of New Avengers. It was maybe its own book for about 10, 11 issues before Civil War started, and after that, it was pretty much event hopping for the next 3-4 years. Yeah,
Civil War. That's the one I was thinking of.
Oh yeah. And that really made me miss the days of Alias and Daredevil, which goes. I know y'all were talking about his Daredevil run before. That was just phenomenal, especially reading that at the time when it was coming out, like month to month. These two series are just completely different from anything else that was being done on a monthly basis at the time. So
yeah, I think that's why. I mean, I think that's why it's such good comics, because it's got a unique voice. It stands out among other comics, and I think that, I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm too dismissive, but I think that when Bendis moved into just writing Avengers and doing more traditional superhero stuff, it stopped feeling unique, and it just felt awkward.
Totally agree with that.
But I don't know. I mean, I guess you can't do Alias forever. Although I wish you kind of would.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe not forever, but longer. There were more cases to do that probably could have been done very easily that he probably wanted to write.
Well, I mean, he's been doing Powers forever, and Alias is basically just Powers in the Marvel Universe in a way.
That's true.
But go ahead, Steve. Go.
Speaking of that, like, I do think that, as we were saying, that he had a longer endgame in mind, because you look at there's this weird random moment in the Rebecca Please Come Home storyline. She's just had sex with a sheriff there, and she's standing in a bathroom.
Yeah, and I was going to bring that up.
She's staring at herself in the mirror, and the dialogue that she has is like she is still under the mind control of Purple Man. Mm-hmm. And it's like he had a longer end game with that he was going to tease that out for a while, that maybe Kilgrave was still influencing her in a way, and she couldn't tell then sometimes if what she was doing was what she wanted to do or what he was making her do, and kind of seeing things through her eyes a little bit. But because the book was getting canceled, it was like, no, we got to wrap this up so fast, and we'll just kind of ditch that.
Yeah, I definitely think I was actually just going to bring that scene up, because I thought that was kind of a weird scene, especially the first time I read it, because I'm pretty certain that the dialogue that was supposed to be her breaking the fourth wall and directly talking to the audience, the readers, which struck me as a little odd, but not entirely. But I had thought that up until that point, although the book used, like, it's a real pulpy, kind of crime detective kind of a story, but Bendis doesn't use a lot of third person narration. Like, it's there. It is there. I'm not saying he doesn't do it, but a lot of times he likes to let the scenes play out with just the dialogue. And you'd occasionally get Jessica just kind of doing the detective narration, but it didn't sound, I would say up until that point, it didn't strike me as like, I guess I should say that scene struck me as a little different, of just like Jessica's internal monologue, and suddenly it's no longer an internal monologue, like it's like she's actually talking to somebody.
Well, it definitely seems, especially because I was rereading this for the first time in a long time, and I just got done pretty much rereading it earlier today.
Yeah,
that definitely does seem to play into exactly what Kilgrave's talking about when she goes to see him.
Well, right, yeah,
and he's talking about it being a comic and her doing this stuff for the the viewers. So yeah, it was a really odd standalone thing that, like, especially pretty much right in the center of the story, didn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it sounded really weird, but it like you were saying, Steve, it felt like this was something he was just kind of like wanting to plant sparsely throughout the story, and then once he got to that end, you're like, oh, okay, I get it. He's being all meta crazy and talking about it, you know, like he's breaking the fourth wall. He's talking about her as if she was a comic book character, and that's like that suddenly kind of like clicked and it made sense. But so I was going to bring that up. I was going to talk about that whole meta aspect of it. I do think that is like what we were just talking about here when she goes to confront Purple Man at the end, and Purple Man is held in SHIELD custody, and he's talking to her. He's explaining to her that like they're in a comic book and she's the main character and he's the villain. I thought that when I first read it, I thought that was amazing because I was way into the idea of a meta narrative. You know, I'd read a lot of Alan Moore, Warren Ellis, you know, was doing it. 2000, early 2000s, that was the time to do like meta comics. I do think that makes the book feel a little dated now. Maybe it's just because of I've read so many comics at that time, and I like was like way into it. But now, I do feel that like the concept of like a character that's like aware that it's a comic book, it feels a little 2000s-y. The same way that we talk about Grim and Gritty being 80s.
It also feels a little out of place in the. I don't want to. Well, not entirely out of place. Like if it's going for him being, you know, crazy and unhinged, it kind of works. But yeah, it's not the most max as far as like the realistic line side.
Yeah,
of it.
I guess what I'm saying is I did think that was a little weird because I didn't think Bendis doing meta narratives was never really Bendis' thing.
Well, he did do that. He did that in New Avengers or Avengers with Sentry, didn't he?
Well,
similar.
I'll come right out and say that I thought that his handling of the Sentry was just awful. Like I did not like it.
Yeah,
at
I
all.
don't remember. I don't recall that fondly, but I remember him doing some similar stuff in some of the other books he did. He did something in Powers with having another.
That's right. Yeah.
Somebody doing a ride along with the cop, and he gets.
Yeah, with Warren Ellis.
Warren Ellis.
The character of Warren Ellis, the comic book writer, was in the comic
so that
book,
was something Bendis kind of liked messing around with that. At least
well, certainly. I mean, it's something that his peers were all doing. I just think that it was never something that like. That's not what his strengths are. Like his strengths are the cadence of his character's dialogue and the beats of the story. And I feel like him kind of like playing around with like meta aspects of the comic just doesn't always work as well for him. I do think that this is probably the only situation, the only way he can make it work by having a character that's just crazy, like he's just a crazy person.
Yeah, I thought it worked well enough in that regard that he was just just spewing out crazy nonsense. Now us,
right.
we the reader. Or get it, because it's a comic, and he's talking about it as a comic. But it's like, while it broke the fourth wall in that regard, it didn't really bother me, so much that it took me out of the story or anything. So.
Oh, sure.
It works, yeah.
No, go ahead, Jordan.
It works well, I think, just in the context of that part of the story. Like, by that point, it's definitely more comic booky, and I think that comes from Kilgrave just being the most comic booky element of her story at that point, just because he is so not street level villain. You don't think of him in that aspect. And I think, I wouldn't change it because her backstory is one of the best things about her.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's going to get a little more bug nuts at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and the Purple Man really is, like, once you get into that aspect of the story, that's where it starts to become more of a superhero comic, because he's such a superhero. I mean, he's such a comic book character, Like, up until this point, I really liked. I think what really sells me on Alias is I liked the first stories, the way they were just sort of like realistic fiction playing around with some loose ideas that were in part of the Marvel Universe. Like, I liked that the first story had, like, she accidentally discovers Captain America's secret identity. Like, that's good. That's a neat thing to do. I liked that when she was looking for the missing girl, like, the concept of whether or not she was a mutant, and, people hate mutants, so did somebody was it hate crime kind of a thing. I like that she plays around with that. But yeah, when you start actually bringing in actual superhero characters or supervillains, you can't help but get a little bit more comic booky.
Well, on the other hand, I think what they did really well with Purple Man and taking this really ridiculous character who was kind of a throwaway character. He was, basically kind of used as a second string loser in his previous appearances. I'm assuming I've never actually seen another comic with the character, but basically what I gotten from the story was he was kind of a throwaway joke, but then Bendis took this throwaway joke character and made him this guy who was pretty freaking horrific. And I mean, he may have been like that in other appearances, I don't know. But it felt to me like the use of Purple Man, what I thought was effective was they took this guy who was basically somebody not really seen as a threat that had these mind control powers, and they made him a monster in to something that was like really kind of scary. And so yeah, it had to me at least, it had the more the super villains type stuff going on, but kind of from more of a real world perspective of what would this guy be like in the real world having this ability. And again, I don't know. Like I said, I don't know the character from outside of this, and he may have always been that same ruthless,
Yeah, no.
I had a kind of comment about that, like the absurdity of superhero stories, and how street level Jessica Jones is. I think that Bendis again kind of has a little meta kind of wink at the audience aspect when at the beginning of the Purple Man storyline, Kazar, I never known how to pronounce that, like, is asking her to go to the Savage Land and find a saber-toothed tiger, and she's just basically like, screw that, that's not what I do. And it's basically saying, yes, it is in a superhero world, but she's not a superhero kind of girl, and she's going to deal with this stuff on her level, and I think that prepares us in a way for the entry of the Purple Man and how that character is handled, and plus the interesting juxtaposition of the tone of this book with then Mark Bagley's art in the flashbacks, who's a very superhero style to him, and known at the time for being on Ultimate Spider-Man. It's just like, let's purposefully use that to jar people to see this depicted that way. I loved that.
Yes, I agree. I really did like that the way it starts with the Kazar thing, because like that would have been such a superhero comic story to do. Like, oh, we got to go to the Savage Land and fight dinosaurs, and yeah, the way she's just like, no, I don't do that kind of thing. That's totally not for me. And then the story goes off into like the dark, realistic Purple Man story. That was a nice nod. I agree. You brought up Mark Bagley doing the flashback sequences. I'm a big fan of Mark Bagley. He was drawing The Amazing Spider-Man in the 90s when I was really obsessed with Spider-Man. And so I've always been a fan of his art. I really liked that they used Bagley to draw the flashback sequences when it's a superhero comic. I thought that was handled really nicely. But it's also a really good contrast to Michael Gaydos's style. Chris and I know we've talked before. I like Michael Gaydos. I think he's a good artist. But I'm not going to hold this on him, because I think that this is just a Bendis thing. I try not to let it bother me, but whenever I see reused panels, it bothers me.
That's definitely a Bendis thing.
That's a Bendis thing, I know. But there were a few. There were like a few that I think stood out as being kind of jarring, I guess you could say. Mm-hmm. Like, I thought a lot of times it works for like the pacing, because Bendis wants to hold this scene, and you just need to let the conversation play out. But there were a few times where it looked like the characters were kind of like stuck in an odd stance, and then the scene, it's just the reused panel. I did notice that the second time around reading it. The first time I probably didn't pay much attention to it.
The fact that it's frequently used most whenever Jessica is sitting down to interview a client.
Oh yeah.
I think that gives it a stylistic aspect that I like it there a lot, the reused panels. But in other situations, yeah, it can be very.
I should say, stylistically, I actually really like it. I really like the way those scenes play out when like she's starting a case and she's like
the repeated layout.
Yeah,
2-page
I
spread,
actually love.
Where
Yeah,
it's got her like 6 panels side by side with the exact pose, and then the person is basically kind of detailing out the events or whatever.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually really well done, and that's really artful. I really like that.
It really does a good job of just selling her character, especially like right in the very first one. What I love about, well, all of the scenes do it well, but in that first one, it does reuse that same panel of Jessica with just kind of the cigarette smoke changing. Yeah. But it shows the client in just ever closer zooming in on the franticness and the paranoia, and she's just taking it in. And that's a really good way to sell the character really early on in the series.
Yeah, I think it's done really well in those situations. But there are some other pages where it's this double whammy combination of the reused art and then Bendis's dialogue style, where characters will like go back and forth and repeat each other, like oh, what about the car? The car? The car? Which car? That car? The car? And like things like that. And it's like I'm like reading this, I'm like, okay, I'm getting into this, and I'm like, God, just like get over this sentence already. Like, let's move on. But there is a specific page where it actually got to me where I thought it was a mistake. I could not tell what was going on. And it's the scene where she meets Jessica Drew. And there's a part where they're in Jessica Jones's office, and Jessica Drew is looking at the picture of Carol Danvers Jessica Drew is looking at the picture of Jessica Jones and Carol Danvers, and she's like, "Oh, you know Carol Danvers?" And Jessica Jones is like, "Yeah." That's in book 3. If you guys have your books and you're looking at them, this page bothered me to no end because it's that combination of repeat dialogue and repeat panels where I couldn't tell if it was a mistake, because you have the bottom half of the page is like 2 columns of 4 panels each, and the left side is the same panel of Jessica Drew, and the right side is the same panel of Jessica Jones. And the dialogue goes, Drew says, "Hey, is this you?" Jones says, "Yes." Drew says, "You know Carol Danvers?" Jones says, "Yes." Drew says, "You know Carol Danvers?" Jones says, "Yes." Drew says, "I know Carol." Jones says, "Yes." I think they actually just made a mistake and repeated the dialogue from like two panels just over and over again.
Oh, it's like I'm actually trying to find
So in yours, because I'm looking at it right now. So with the 4 Jessicas, it all says, each one literally just says yes.
Yes. Okay. Sorry, it says yes, yeah, I know. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah,
I misread that.
No, yeah, because I was like, yeah, that sounds like a typo.
But the middle 4 panels are repeated. You know Carol Danvers? Yeah. You know Carol Danvers? Yeah. That has to be a mistake.
I don't know. I think that's one of the places where Bendis, I think, hears dialogue a certain way in his head, and sometimes it's very hard to do inflection.
Sure.
And I think it probably gets lost a little bit there.
Because one of them is a question and one of them is a statement. You know Carol Danvers?
Yeah. You're right. No.
Yeah.
You totally got me on that. You're right. I missed the question mark. Jeez. But that's what I'm talking about when I say this, like, repeat dialogue and repeat images. Like, I actually do kind of like lose some of the like the flow of the story. Like, I don't. If it's the like I said, it's the double whammy of this repeat dialogue and the same image. Like, I start to get lost in it.
I was going to ask if any of y'all got this when she's in the bell tower talking to the girl that ran away after she comes back and the dad's dead and she gets smacked by the mom and then she runs off and she's in the bell tower. He has a repeated panel where the girl's basically covering her face, and she has her hand under her glasses.
Yeah.
But there's basically, it repeats. It has the panel that shows a close up of Jessica's face. It repeats the same thing with the girl with with her hands under glasses. But then the next panel, it moves on to where the girl doesn't have the hand under her glasses anymore. She's talking. But then in the next panel, the hands are under the glasses again.
Yeah.
So it basically looks like a mess up, which was just odd. That was like one of those things where I was like, what? Because it's basically jumping back a scene, which is something is a mistake you'll see like on TV, movies, but not really in a comic. So it kind of stuck out as funny to me when I was reading that earlier today. So.
I'm curious, like, because I don't know if the versions, because I have the 2 Ultimate collection that has like some of the outtakes and script blurbs, and he's very much dialogue focused. Like even in his scripts, it's very much just, here is the script, stage the scene how you want. So there's almost a level where it seems like he might just be, all right, here's, you kind of know, I'm sure they talk about it. It strikes me that he would talk with the artist a lot more based on how loose the script is. But it's hard to say without knowing specifically.
Sure. Well, I don't know, like, I like the book a lot, but the use of repeated panels, I'm not a fan of it. I do think that it's a shortcut, and I think that it leads to kind of some of this confusion and things that we're talking about here. Just to compare this book to a similar book, I'm sure you guys have probably read or at least seen Criminal by Ed Bickford. Ed Bickford is an artist friend of mine. He doesn't work for Marvel.
Brubaker.
Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Have you guys read Criminal?
Yes. I've read a few of them a while back.
Because Gaydos and Phillips have a similar artistic style. I definitely like Phillips more, just because Phillips doesn't reuse any of his panels, and I think his overall artistic his layouts are a lot more inventive. But that might, again, I'm not to sound like I'm coming down on Gaydos, because I totally understand that this is Bendis' writing style, is to work with this kind of repeat panels, and I don't think Brubaker does that as much.
I almost. Well, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, I was just gonna say I think it is directly related to Bendis, because you look at his art on like the Manhunter series he did for DC, and I don't think that he uses that that repetition as frequently. So, but you're right, it is jarring at times.
I'm still flummoxed that I completely misread that scene. I missed that dang question mark. But anyway, it's still a really good book, and I like the first book. I think this is Bendis' greatest strength. I think all of Bendis' good books have this kind of a thing where they have this really specific pacing, and it's very different from like what you'd expect from a superhero comic, And one thing, we talked about this in the Powers podcast, Chris, when we were talking about Bendis, but a lot of his story, the pacing is driven by the dialogue, the way the dialogue bubbles will flow around the page. And I do think that's interesting. It's really not driven by the imagery or the comics. It's really all about the dialogue.
Yeah.
Which is kind of a weird thing for a comic book, because, it's...
Well, actually, I was talking about, I first, found Bendis' work when he was working on Jinx for Caliber Comics, and the thing that made me just appreciate it, I think it was issue 2 of Jinx. It basically, the entire issue is the main character, or Gold. He calls the diner that Jinx, the main character, is at, from a payphone, and so the majority of the issue is a conversation from a payphone to a diner. And that's all it is. And it was one of the best comics I'd ever read at that point, being like 15. And it just blew me away. And like whenever I read that, I was like, oh man, and, I had to find everything else, which he hadn't done a lot at that point. But yeah, definitely dialogue is is always the driving force, and everything that all of his best work. I think.
Sure.
Well, and one of the best issues of the whole series is the issue that it's just Scott Lang and her having a date, and that's a really good issue.
It is,
and it's basically just the talking heads the entire 22 pages practically.
Yeah. And I really enjoyed it, and I've forgotten about the J. Jonah Jameson issue, where he wants to hire her to hunt down Spider-Man.
Yeah, I was actually just about to bring that up.
Yeah, that was a really cool. Was that Gaydos or somebody else that illustrated that one? That looked like
I think that was
looked like John J. Muth or whatever his name is.
It says it's still Gaydos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Credits.
He's probably. I mean, he might just be like painting.
You're right.
Yeah.
Because it is paint. It looks painted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that was a really cool standalone issue that I've forgotten about. So
I actually was going to bring that issue up because I really disliked it. Actually.
Oh, did you?
I kind of couldn't stand it. I actually forgot about it. Like, I had completely forgotten about it, and I was rereading it, and I was like, oh my goodness, I forgot about this. I think that this style, it really does not play to Bendis' strengths. Just reading, it feels like you're reading a script,
right.
And there's no. I guess what I'm trying to get at is, like, reading it like this, you can really see the difference between just reading a script and reading a comic book page that has been lettered, so that the dialogue, like I was talking earlier, the dialogue flows in a specific way, and you don't really get that in this. You just have all of the back and forth just like flatly laid out on the page, and I actually found it very difficult to read. Like, his back and forths, of characters just like repeating words at each other, it works when it's a word balloon and they're all right next to each other, and you can just be like bam, 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 and and you get this cadence, you get this rhythm to the dialogue. But when it's in just a script column, there's no rhythm to it. There's no it's completely artless, I guess is what I would say. And that's why, kind of going back to what I was saying before, why although Bendis' comics are driven by dialogue, which is odd for a comic book that it's driven by the text and not the art, it still really is driven by art, because it's driven by the way the art is laid out on the page in word balloons. And I think that you lose that completely in this issue, where it's just.
I enjoyed it as a standalone experimental type of, Bendis is always like doing.
And this was,
kind of just trying something different. I dug it for that. So.
Mm-hmm.
This is actually I wanted to bring up, because as we were talking about him and dialogue and that being his focus, one thing I had noted just with pretty much all of the issues throughout the whole run is there is so much dialogue that you get pages that are, like, most of the pages are more than the standard, like, 6-panel maximum. You get a lot of pages that are, in excess of 10 panels.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think a lot of times the dialogue, and then you have some where it's just a case of, do you think Bendis is so devoted to the scripting and the dialogue that it gets in his own way? Because in addition to those experimental ones, which are definitely something that seems like he's driving them, given his that first Daredevil arc he did and other issues kind of like this one, and then just pages where instead of incorporating the dialogue, it's like the 4 panels and then an entire script run all down the spine.
Mm-hmm.
And so it seems like at times, I think this is a criticism he gets throughout his whole career. I think he's gotten better at managing that recently. Now that he's maybe a little older and a little less in that experimental what can I do with comics phase. But it seems like sometimes his dialogue gets in his own way.
Oh, I think that is partially the case. I've read some Bendis comics that you could have edited out like 50% of the words and it would not have changed the story like at all. I think that some of his comics get a little cluttered with dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
But
comics are a medium of brevity. Comics are like tweets. You have to limit your characters, and he wants to write, a blog.
I think so. I've talked about this before. I can't remember if I talked about this with you, Chris, but one of the things that I always find so interesting about comic book pacing, particularly the way we think of modern superhero comics as kind of the way they were created, or I shouldn't say created, I should say recreated or interpreted through Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, because I think most people like the effect that they've had on the industry, those two creators, and what they were doing with Marvel Comics has kind of shaped what I think a lot of modern comic book readers think of as a superhero comic, or even just a comic book. And the reason there's such a specific style of dialogue, a specific style of talk in comics, is because of the way they were created, the Marvel style. With Jack would just draw the whole issue and then give it to Stan Lee, and Stan Lee would have to put all the dialogue in, and they would all be working within the constraints that they had of the medium. So Jack would try to tell a complete story, and then Stan would have to try and fit all of the dialogue that's necessary to make that story understood in whatever space Jack gave him. And a lot of times that meant entire scenes of motivation where you're seeing like why a character is doing something is all told in a single panel, because he only gave him a panel to do it. And I think that since Bendis came along, honestly, I think that's loosened up a little bit, of people kind of trying to let comics breathe and let the characters just kind of have a conversation that goes on for a couple of pages instead of just trying to wrap it up, in a couple of panels. But I think that does kind of get in Bendis's way sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that the reason why it works well in the issue with Scott Lang and they're having the conversation, I think it's down to Gaydos, because of the facial expressions, and I'm going to go close on somebody's face here, I'm going to zoom back a little bit here, and he's selling it, as opposed to in that painted issue, the images are so static, and it just doesn't have the life to the conversation.
I completely agree. That's really my problem with the Spider-Man, the J. Jonah Jameson issue, is it feels so detached. Like you're really not. It doesn't feel like a comic book, honestly. And I appreciate that they're trying to do something different and experimental. This was that time when people were trying to do, occasionally different things in mainstream comics. But I just do not think it worked for Bendis.
I raised the question. I agree on certain points. Like for the longest time, I tried reading his Daredevil run, and I kind of wish I'd skipped that first 4 arc he did with David Mack. Not that it's bad as an overall story, but it is very experimental and can be hard to get through as compared to pretty much the rest of his Daredevil run.
Yeah,
I totally forgot about that arc with Mack.
David Mack, yeah.
But the other thing that's always interesting to me about as wordy as he can be, I don't know that there's a breezier, despite how many dialogue balloons are in each issue, I can go through a Bendis issue in almost no time. I mean, that's one of my biggest problems buying his work sometimes, is I love it, but I know I'm going to read it 2 to 3 times faster than a lot of other issues that I might get, just because there is a rhythm to it that he really has perfected, especially in the past 5, 6, 7 years, where his conversations do flow, even if maybe you could cut parts of them out.
Oh, I agree. I think that his strength in his dialogue is his flow, like the control he has of the flow of a conversation. But, yeah, I do not think his comics are very dense. Actually, I think they're pretty light in terms of content, because it basically is just a conversation, and there's not a lot of other storytelling going on. And a lot of times, especially in the superhero comics, the storytelling will be like, most of the book will be the conversation, and then they'll just do like a full-page, double-page spread to like cover all the action. And it's like, here's 2 pages where all the action is. Here's 20 pages of the characters talking. And that's... I'm not like saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying that that's why it's really fast and really easy to read. Because it seems like a lot of the storytelling is kind of like segmented. Like, here's your action page. Now here's all your conversation pages. It doesn't feel very integrated.
Yeah, I've noticed that in his earlier works, and that's something I've appreciated. Like his more recent stuff, like Miles Morales' Ultimate Spider-Man books, have done a better job of mixing conversations and fights. Like there's a great one of the best fights in that whole run is when Miles is fighting I forget the criminal he is, his uncle basically, and they have a whole it's a whole issue long fight, but it also mixes in the conversation. So I think it works well when he can mix the two.
You know, and talking about his pacing, it can really be hell buying these in single issue once a month when you're like, okay, I just read that in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And not a whole lot happened. It was good. I liked it, but now I got to wait a month for something else to happen.
Well, that really is that is a lot of people's criticism of the decompressed style of writing. Because, like, Alias is a good example. This very clearly is written to be read as a trade paperback.
Yes.
One thing that I found kind of interesting is reading the first book. You cannot really tell, just reading through the whole book, you cannot tell where the issue breaks are. Except for in the few spots where they redo a scene. I noticed this, there was specifically in the second story arc, the one about Rick Jones, or the fake Rick Jones.
Mm.
There's a page where it repeats a few panels, and it clearly was that was a cliffhanger from the previous issue, and then the next issue started, and they're starting with the same scene to remind you what's going on. Sort of like when you watch an old TV show, but you have the DVDs, and you they get to a commercial break, and it just is this weird something is happening, and then it fades out, and then it fades back in 5 seconds before the previous scene to remind you what was going on. There was 2 pages of that in the first book. Other than that, though, the whole story is really seamless. I think it flows from beginning to end, the first story arc. And a lot of times when you read comics that are collected, you get this really, you can really feel the issue pacing, where it's every 22 pages there's a cliffhanger. You know, like a Mark Millar comic. Every 22 pages, there's a full page spread of a close up of a character's face, giving you some kind of cliffhanger. I don't think you really get that much. That's a good thing for me. I like that the book reads kind of as a complete story. But yeah, I can't imagine reading that as single issues.
It's interesting because, like I said, I have the Ultimate Collections, and so these are all broken down by issues. They have all of the covers in the original places.
Mm-hmm.
But just kind of speaking to that, yeah, it's very clear there are very subtle cliffhangers. One of the subtlest ones in the whole run is during the Missing Girl arc. The scene where she walks into the church and the guy's practicing his hate speech against mutants.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Can you hear me back there? I can't really tell." And she's just like, "I hear you just fine." And then that's an issue break. That's not something you think of as a cliffhanger.
Mm-hmm.
And so it reads very smoothly right into that next scene.
Yeah, I've got the omnibus, and it also has the issue break with the David Mack covers as well. So
well,
I'm not sure the trades work.
The interesting thing about that, I have I believe it's the first printing of the trade paperbacks when they first came out, because I was reading the book when it was coming out, but I was just reading the trades. And what's interesting is books 2, 3, and 4 have the issue breaks with the covers. Every 22 pages you get the end of the issue and you see David Mack's cover for the next issue. But the first book does not. The first book, they don't put any of the cover breaks in there. So the whole thing reads... It really reads like a graphic novel, except that they put the first 2 story arcs in one book. So there's this weird moment where the first story arc ends and the second story arc begins, and you don't really realize it. The first story arc ends with Jessica Jones talking to Steve Rogers because he's thanking her, and he gets the tape from her. And Jessica Jones picks up the phone and calls Carol Danvers. And then the very next page, Jessica and Carol are out for lunch, out eating. So it feels like it's just like a natural continuation of the story. And then you realize, like, oh, wait, a second story arc is starting up here. And it's just, I don't know, I just noticed that it's kind of like makes for strange comic book reading when you're so used to reading books like in a very specific, like, segmented, like, by their arcs. I'm not really saying that's like a good or a bad thing. I just thought it was interesting how the first trade paperback differs from the others.
I just want to say I was reading it in single issues myself because I'm a purist, and you all trade waiters are awful people.
Yeah, I'm single-handedly killing the comic book industry.
I got the singles issues around here somewhere, but actually trying to find those would be a task unto itself. Actually, it took me a while to even hunt down the omnibus.
So, we've kind of droned on about this comic for a little while now. Let's see. Oh my goodness, we've been talking for an hour. Let's talk a little bit about the recent TV show. What do you guys think about the show? I'll just open it up to anybody.
Well, like, you said you've only seen the first episode.
That's correct. I guess I'll preface this by saying...
Do you care about spoilers?
I absolutely do not care about spoilers. Okay. You know, I don't want to come off as like a grumpy Gus or a crabby kind of guy. I don't really care about TV shows that much. I don't watch a lot of TV. Chris, you'll recall in our Preacher podcast, I kind of like got on my soapbox and was like, whatever, I don't care about a Preacher TV show. I just want to read the comics.
Yeah, I'm on board with you on that one. That they can do Preacher right on television.
Right, yeah.
I don't know, I mean, I enjoyed the show. It was different from the book. Talking about Alias and Jessica Jones. I thought it got kind of dumb in spots towards the end, personally. I thought all the actors did a good job. I thought they caught the feel of the story well. But I thought the first 5 or 6 episodes were like really solid, almost perfect. And then some questionable character motivation in the latter half of the season, I thought. So, but yeah, overall good. So,
yeah. I agree. I really like it. Between the two Netflix shows, I prefer it to Daredevil. I think they're both pretty stellar on the whole, compared to pretty much anything Marvel's put out. Not that Marvel's put out bad stuff, just it's very exemplary work. It definitely focuses more on Kilgrave on the whole, and I think that's sort of like the comic. When it gets to Kilgrave, towards the end, it really starts to feel a little more comic booky than it has the rest of the time. Like, what they do really well with Kilgrave in the beginning is they're very restrained, and it just seems like a guy who has this power, and he's kind of living his life in a really malicious way, and then he's kind of like, about the time they start to try and explain his powers is when it gets a little mad science-y, over the top.
I absolutely love the show, but I completely hear that about the mad science. I'm a big fan of the show Orphan Black, and it's kind of for the same reason, that the acting performances carry it past sometimes the goofiness of some of the plot lines, and you know, the science on that show, sometimes I'm like scratching my head like, what's going on here? I don't really get this. And the same thing with Jessica Jones, that I was like, okay, brought in the parents and a scientific explanation of the study they were doing, and I don't care about this. Just give me more Kilgrave and Jessica. That's what I want. But still, I loved the show. I thought it was phenomenal, and it stands, I think, as one of my favorite adaptations of a comic of all time, because they were not beholden to the book, really. They stepped away from the book. They took the core concepts of the book and the character and ran with it in their own direction, as they would have to, because you can't include teenage Jessica Jones having a crush on Peter Parker,
right,
in a Netflix TV show. That's not going to be viable. So they went in their own direction with it. And I thought it was great.
That's good to hear. As I said, I watched the first episode, and I thought it was pretty good. as somebody who doesn't watch a lot of TV, and if you guys listen to the episode, I talk about this a lot on the podcast on episodes. If you listen to our second podcast on iZombie, I don't know if you guys have watched the iZombie show, but I went off on a little bit of a rant about how much I dislike that show because it's nothing like the comic. But I liked. I agree with what you're saying, Steve. I liked that Alias. They weren't trying to do the comic story, but it still felt like what we like about the comic. Like it was the characters felt like the characters. And that's what I was going to ask you guys. How do you feel about Jessica Jones as she's presented in the TV show? Does she feel the same as she does in the comic? I only saw the first episode, so I don't really know how she goes throughout the series.
I was very wary of that actress playing Jessica Jones. I mean, I was familiar from her from she was on Breaking Bad. She had that sitcom on one of the network stations. But I thought her delivery in the first episode was very stilted.
Oh, okay.
But then after that, I thought she fit the character really well. But I remember like watching the first episode and like it felt like all the dialogue was just off by a hair. But then like I said, like second episode, I was like, okay, I'm good. And for the rest of it, it didn't bother me at all. I thought David Tennant did an awesome job as Kilgrave as well. So.
Yeah, the performances throughout were strong, and going back to what I was saying earlier is even when it gets broad, I agree that the actors are what bring it through and allow it to still land. Like there's a lot of triumph at the end, and they're able to make what would be otherwise goofy comic book concepts work really well in context. I mean, this show also has Nuke from the comics, and they go the full everything. Basically, they go with everything but the face tattoo. They have the pills and his shady past and him going kind of nuts, but it works for this character and really for the role he fills in this exploration of female characters and toxic masculinity. That's really at the core of the series, really.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that character development was like out of left field for me. I wasn't familiar with the character Nuke at all from the comic, and like whenever that happened in the show, I was like, "What the fuck?" it took me a little while because I was like that was one of the things that like felt like everything else came to a grinding halt when that happened. I was like, "What?" And then I was like, "All right, let me figure out what's going on." Like we started like Googling the character, find out what was up with that. So.
Yeah, because I actually really like Jessica Jones, the character in the comic. And I was a little worried about how well that character would be presented on TV. But I'm glad I wasn't like completely sold in the first episode. I thought it was a good episode, but I wasn't completely sold on her as Jessica Jones. But I'm glad to hear that as the series progresses, it starts to feel correct or feel right.
No.
Yeah, I think the first episode is really all about selling. Maybe and it's a pilot, so there has to be a certain level of that. Even with Netflix and binge watching,
right,
there's a certain level of your pilot has to really sell hard to get people to let the next episode play.
Right.
And it really leans into the idea that she's broken and terrified of Kilgrave before, at the end of that episode, she decides it's time to fight back.
Right.
And that's what I think gives the character strength. For me, the only thing it's really a complaint of they had 13 hours and they chose to do what they do, and I don't begrudge them, but it's kind of the same problem I had with Daredevil, where Daredevil didn't have a whole lot of him being a lawyer. I would have liked more of a sense of Jessica Jones doing, being a PI and following on cases, because that's really what the book is about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you get Kilgrave at the end, and it's something that looms over the series, but the cases are really what sell you on Alias for the first 20 issues. And so it would have been nice to have more, cases.
So the Alias show, it's pretty much just the whole Purple Man story arc told out through the episodes. Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna watch it because I did enjoy the first episode, but I definitely the thing I like about the comic is Jessica Jones going on cases.
Right. Yeah, I was looking forward to seeing more of that. I'm hoping they do more of that in season 2. And another thing I would really love to see them do, either on Jessica Jones or on Daredevil show, is bring in the mutant growth hormone, which I guess they'd have to change it because I don't know that they can do anything with mutant because of Fox.
They'll just do inhuman growth hormone.
Right, but because that was something I forgot about, and a plot point, and how that tied into Daredevil whenever it got to that.
Yeah,
Spider Girl and whatnot. I love that concept when it was presented Daredevil, and then when they brought it over to the Alias book. And I know the second season Daredevil are going to be focused on Punisher, which I think is going to be pretty awesome. But I would like to see them bring in some of those story elements into the second season of Jessica Jones,
Well, it's interesting you say that, because it's something I haven't seen people talk about, because I've read a lot about the show, but there is like a part towards the very end when they're talking about Nuke and the experiments done, or like on Jessica, they talk about this group called IGH, and it doesn't have any sort of meaning, and looking it up in Marvel Comics, it doesn't have any sort of tie-in, but my first thought was inhuman growth hormone.
Right, yeah.
I don't know if that's... They position it as an organization, but I wouldn't be surprised.
IGH sounds awfully close to MGH.
Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a one-letter difference.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I would like to see them take more elements from the series in the second season. Ever doing some proper investigation of other stuff. Maybe have a couple of different story arcs rather than one central one.
What I was going to say is that I think their justification in not doing that is that can sometimes feel to audiences today like we're going back to the way TV used to be, where Bill Bixby rolled into a town and
too episodic.
And even shows like CSI, Miami, NCIS, all those shows are very case of the week oriented.
Right.
And I definitely wouldn't want that. I would think more like 4 or 5 episodes, kind of like a story arc, like a 5-issue story arc, 5-episode story arc.
That is one thing I should say. Although I'm lamenting the fact that I would like to see more of Jessica Jones on cases, I appreciate that it's not just a detective procedural. Right. Just like a cookie cutter TV, like each episode is exactly the same, but in this show, she's an ex-superhero and has superpowers, and then in this other show he is pretending to be a psychic, and in this other show she eats brains and gets visions, and in this, they're all exactly the same, they just have that little twist to give the character like their slight advantage, so I appreciate that Jessica Jones doesn't go that route, and that they are trying to tell a compelling story arc.
Yeah, like when you think about X-Files, you don't tend to think of the case of the week episodes. You think of the overarching mythos of the show. Mm-hmm. And I do think that some aspects of TV these days have gotten so wrapped up in the overarching mythos that they've forgotten that sometimes case of the week can be damn good TV too.
Well, not to sound too contradictory, because I watched the X-Files quite a bit back in the day, and I really liked the X-Files. And pretty much my favorite episodes were the Monster of the Week episodes. So I actually think that the X-Files, that kind of pacing, they did a pretty good job in their heyday. Obviously, we all know that everything went off the rails at some point for that show, but at least I assume we all know that. But I think they did pretty good with their pacing of like so many episodes. It's Monster of the Week, Monster of the Week, Monster of the Week. Then you do your ongoing story arc episode, and you just kind of flow back and forth between. You just got to sprinkle in your ongoing story, like it's a tough balancing act. It is, because a lot of people, some people just want your procedural. Each episode is its case of the week things, and other people want to just sit down and watch a 13-hour story arc. So I can understand it's a tough thing to be to try and balance.
it is, but I think it's possible to do, and I don't even necessarily, if Jessica Jones continues and it's still, a big mega storyline every year, I think it works, because I think this season worked brilliantly. I mean, it would be a matter of them figuring out what they wanted to do with the second season, but, it's possible to do a good balance of case of the week to mythology, even in the same episodes. Like, one of the things, and I say this as someone who, is just looking for the excuse and funds to order the iZombie omnibus that just came out. One of the things I love about the iZombie show is that it is very heavily serialized, but there is a case of the week every single week that uses elements from the case to then feed back into the ongoing character developments. And so there's a way to strike that balance that I think Jessica Jones, if it wanted to, they could, but I don't necessarily know that that's the focus. And maybe it will be for a second season. It's hard to say.
Yeah, they could probably go in any direction. I have a feeling that they'll probably keep doing stylistically what's working, like the way Daredevil and Jessica Jones are going. But I'm not a big TV expert. My big complaint about TV, especially when they do like serialized story arcs, is I feel like a lot of TV wastes my time. A lot of people like to binge watch things, and I think when you binge watch something, that's when you really start to feel the stretched out nature of the story, because a lot of it is designed to be watched, weekly. Each new episode is weekly, but it's like one ongoing story, and I feel like the pacing can get a little weird. Whereas, like, if you were going to binge watch it, you could probably edit down a lot of stuff into a tighter story, but it's not. It's that balance of, like, it's, they want 13 episodes and it's got to be told over this length of time, but you also just want to sit down and watch it all so you don't forget anything. I don't know. I'm just kind of rambling about TV. It has nothing to do with Jessica Jones or Alias. That's why I read comic books.
Well, I think that's why, for me, Jessica Jones worked better than Daredevil, because every episode of Daredevil was an hour long, whereas Jessica Jones some of them were shorter, some of them were longer, and there were times with Daredevil when I thought, why is this episode still happening? Why are we not moving on to the next episode? Come on.
Yeah.
Those constraints, I hope that they start to realize, why do we have to have 13 episodes? Why not 10? Why not 11? Why not 12? Why not 15? Just because we can do whatever the hell we want. We're going to release it all at once.
Right.
So.
And I would like to see, especially like with it being a Netflix show. I didn't realize that about Jessica Jones, that the episodes were like different in length. Because like if you're doing it as a Netflix show and you have that, like you said, it's just released all at once, it would like completely free up you could actually like have tight control over the pacing of the show. You wouldn't have, like you said, you shouldn't be locked into 13 hour-long episodes. The show should just be told in whatever length of time the story needs to be told. It's interesting to think about. I hope that like Netflix TV will kind of evolve in that direction.
That's always been my hope, because I think a lot of the shows on Netflix, and I think Daredevil and Jessica Jones do show both ends of it. I particularly, things like season 4 of Arrested Development, it felt like there were no deleted scenes in that, because they felt, okay, we can have a 45-minute episode because Netflix doesn't care, but there is merit and, in fact, worth in paring yourself down to what is the essential, because it makes for a tighter episode. And I think Jessica Jones did that better than Daredevil, which, could run up to an hour 5 minutes per episode and just be a little... I would say overall Daredevil's probably at least 2 hours longer than Jessica Jones, even though they're both 13 episodes.
Interesting. So one last thing I wanted to talk about before we bring this to a close. One thing that we didn't talk about earlier. We've been talking about the Kilgrave story arc, because that's obviously the it's the main focus of the show for sure, but it's also an important part of the comic. I want to know what you guys think about this, but first I'm just going to come right out and say I really, really like that. I'm talking about the comic now because I haven't watched the show. I really like that Jessica as a character wasn't actually specifically just plainly raped by Kilgrave. I think that they did a good job of making it basically the same thing. Like, what he did was, like, completely, he mind raped her. But I was just so happy that Bendis was able to achieve that effect of like using like a metaphor for rape without just having her be raped. Because as somebody who's read a lot of Alan Moore books, I get really tired of that being the like standard. What's the worst thing that could happen to a woman? Oh, she was raped. I thought Bendis actually was pretty creative about that, of actually making it seem worse. What are you guys' feelings on that situation?
Well, first, the show is never fully explicit about it, but it does leave you with the impression that, yes, she was raped. And, I think why the show handles it well is that it's not just plot device. We see her suffering from PTSD, basically, and dealing with it, rather than this is just a plot device to make her tough.
Right.
It's something that happened to a human being, and we see how she as a character copes, and how sometimes she copes well and other times she does not cope well with that. That's what makes her such a wonderful character, I think, is that she's real, and the realistic portrayal of that is what sells the show to me so well.
I think on both sides of it, they work in different ways. Because, I think in the show it is more explicit that she was raped, because there's another character, the Hope Schlottman, who she is looking for in the first episode. They're outright, she gets impregnated by Kilgrave. Is a plot element. So I think it's very clear that in the show sexual abuse was more a part of it. I think in the book, I think in both, what's important is that she wasn't raped just to be a sad character to service someone else's story or to make her flawed for the sake of being flawed. It really is like a big part of her character and is used to, expertly, ideally tell. I think the show does handle it better. I think it has more room to focus on the assault and the violation than, Kilgrave just sort of comes in at the end and it's part of the reveal and, does inform her character. But, I know this is a book that has both praise and hate against it for its portrayal, but I think it does more right than it doesn't. And, and this is all saying it as someone who is not the survivor of sexual assault. I don't know.
Right.
But reading about it, it is something that has gotten a lot of praise. And the show's gotten probably even more so for being very empowering in looking at it very bluntly, and I think it does a good job.
Yes. Yes. I mean, I'm with you, Jordan. Again, as somebody who is not coming from that point of view. I am not a survivor of sexual assault, so I am looking at it from the outside, and I have heard so much praise about the show for the way they portray it, and like with what you guys are saying, the important part about it is that that's the story, like that's her character. It's not a plot device. Like it's what the story is about, and I think that's what makes it work so well. So, I think I've pretty much said everything I can on the subject of Brian Michael Bendis and Michael Gaydos' Alias. Any final thoughts you guys want to add?
One thing I wanted to add, because I thought of it earlier, as far as Bendis experimentation, I do like his excerpts from Rick Jones's book. I really like those bits of prose.
You know what? I did too. I actually forgot to bring that up. Like, I thought that worked in a way that the painted script issue did not work.
But yeah,
I have nothing else to add myself.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, that's fine. That's fine. I think it was a good conversation. I mean, I think it's a good book. I think it's an important book because it came out at a time when Marvel was really kind of changing the landscape of the mainstream comic industry. I mean, like Alias, as we said, Alias is a book that like people like Bendis himself was doing at Image on a book called Powers, and it's a book that is taking what people were doing at Vertigo and transplanting it into the Marvel Universe. And I think that ultimately that's for the best. So yeah, that was it's a good book, and I'm glad we were able to sit down and talk about it. Thank you guys all for being on the show. It's a good time.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you've actually gotten through this whole podcast, thank you for listening, everybody. My name is Aaron Walther. You can find comics that I have written at newhavencomics.com, and I have a brand new webcomic that's going up. It will be up by the time this podcast airs. It's called The Birdlander, and you can read it at www.thebirdlander.com. So please check it out. We're just getting going on it, and we hope to be doing it for a long time. And you can find me on Facebook, Aaron Walther on Facebook, and you can find me on Twitter at AAWALTHER. That's at AA Walther on Twitter. Chris, where can people find some of your work?
My website's junkdrawerstudio.com, and that's got links to Facebook and all that other stuff. So.
And of course, Chris and I will have some new stuff going up on New Haven Comics next year. We're working on our graphic novel Dogtown.
Next year or this?
You know what? I'm still in 2015 mode. I keep forgetting that. Holy cow. We're living in the future.
But y'all in 2017?
Yeah. See you guys in 360.
I'm taking the year off.
Chris and I will have some stuff coming up soon on this year on newhavencomics.com. We're working on finishing our graphic novel Dogtown, and we're going to start working on bringing back some new Zero's Hero stuff. So no exact dates on that one yet, though. Jordan, where can people find any of your stuff?
The main thing would be, as mentioned at the beginning of the episode, my original graphic novel Terminal Protocol with artist Rem Brew is currently in production. You can check that out at facebook.com/Terminal Protocol. That's where the updates for public people who are going to go. We're going to try and put a good amount of content during the production of the book. And we're currently working on trying to set up maybe a backer kit to do additional pre-orders, but that's still early stages. But that would be the main place. You can also find me on Twitter at Indigo Master. That's ENDIGOMASTER. And if you want to hear other podcasts about comics, video games, TV that I am a co-host of, that's thejoyofgaming.com. We cover kind of everything pop culture.
Awesome. And Steve, do you want weirdos on the internet finding you and talking to you? Where if weirdos on the internet wanted to find you, where would they find you?
Probably the easiest place would be Facebook. I have a Facebook page for all of my comics works, and it is called Myriad, MYRIAD. If you search for Myriad on Facebook, you'll find me. And I actually just uploaded this week every comic that I've done prior to 2014, actually. So about 100 pages of comics that I did that you can read for free on Facebook at Myriad. And you can also find my comic group, Ink and Drink Comics, on Facebook as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you again, guys, for being on the show. I have to have you back for another episode. We'll have to start talking about comics we need to read and talk about.
Sounds great.
Awesome.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, thank you, everybody, for listening. We'll see you all next time.